thousands of people that are there. Seriously, I am going to try and stay stationary so that folks can hear, but I really hope this can be a conversation. I love interacting with a group this size because we really can have a conversation. My name is Pekel. I am in really my third year here as superintendent, and sometimes I think of it as my second, in that my first year, for most of the year, I was here in an interim capacity. But in any event, I'm thrilled to be part of the Rochester community. My wife and I bought a house and moved in this summer, and so after 2 years in an apartment, are feeling more grounded and connected. And I will just say, as a former social studies teacher, whether you vote for or against this referendum, I'm thrilled to see you here because this is a sign of civic engagement. And that is something that is vital to the lifeblood of communities and of a democracy. So this is not, however, a campaign pitch, because I can't do that. I can provide information on this, as we have been trying to do anywhere we are able to find people to listen, but it is not something in which we will be telling you how to vote, though I can urge you to vote. In order to understand the referendum that is on the ballot on November 7th, it is important to give you a bit of a grounding, and I hope your eyes don't glaze over too much here, in how schools are funded in Minnesota. Because the way schools are funded is very important to what is on the ballot. But I'm not going to go too far into the weeds. The first thing you need to know is the vast majority of our funding comes from the state of Minnesota. Which is not the same in many states. In many states, it's much more your local property taxes. And so when I was student teaching in Boston Public Schools long ago, if you went across the city line to Lexington, Massachusetts, the student per student funding was $10,000 higher than it was in the urban area of Boston. In Minnesota, it's mostly funded by the state, largely to create more equality across the state. And so whatever happens every 2 years at the Capitol has huge implications for our school district and every school district in terms of the funding we receive. But there is a way for local communities to decide to invest more in their schools, and those are levies that local citizens can approve at the ballot box. And there's three main food groups to those kinds of levies. One is a facilities levy that you can use to build buildings. And that's not what we're here talking about tonight. Rochester did that in 2019 and built 4 new schools and a new pool at Century High School. The second is an operating levy, which is, like it sounds, intended to fund core operations. And in any school district, 85% of those about are people, salaries and benefits. That operating levy is also not what we're talking about here tonight, though Rochester does have an operating levy that the citizens of Rochester passed in 2015 that goes until 2025 and generates $17 million a year. The third kind of levy is what we're here to talk about tonight, and that has got the pretty confusing, vague name, Capital Projects Levy. And in the legislation, there's a long list of things that can be funded with a Capital Projects Levy, but I've come to think of it as the ability to buy stuff. Buy things that support teaching and learning. It is not a source that you can use to pay for those core operations, the salaries and benefits of staff and other core parts of the educational process. And so as we have been looking at our financial position in Rochester Public Schools, and also a very aggressive strategic plan that is based on a lot of research and evidence and community engagement, it became clear that we needed to think hard about the money. And we needed to think hard about making sure Rochester Public Schools is on a path to provide the level and kind of funding that we need to ensure that all kids are on a path to thrive. Unfortunately, that has meant cutting $21 million since I've been here as superintendent. That has meant eliminating over 150 positions that were in this school district. People that I worked with every day, and I've only been here 2 years, are no longer with us. We didn't do that lightly. The recommendations that I made and that the school board approved, and we have some board members here, were incredibly painful. But we did it because we knew that to keep Rochester Public Schools a school district in which we could ensure our citizens was going to be able to improve outcomes for the long term, we had to make some hard decisions. Unlike a private business, which can raise prices or decrease profits, we can only attract more students, which we're working very hard to do, or we can go and ask for additional support for our local communities. And so that is why we have put one of those capital projects levies on the ballot for this fall. The levy, in our case, would support technology. And I'll tell you about the specifics of what it would support, but here's where our levy gets a little bit harder to understand, and it's why I'm so grateful that you're here tonight. In supporting $10.1 million in technology funding every year for 10 years, it would allow us to free up $7 million that we're currently spending on technology from our general fund, our core support from the state of Minnesota for teaching and learning, and we would put that immediately into maintaining our class sizes at their current levels. So if you remember nothing else from this initial presentation, it's 10.1 million, frees up 7 million for class size, and 3.1 million for some very innovative and exciting investments in technology that are tied to our strategic plan. So taking a step back to break that $10.1 million down, the $7 million that we are currently taking from our general fund every year to pay for technology mostly goes to four things. The first thing are devices, computer devices. Most students have a tablet, a Chromebook, or an iPad, and some, especially at the high school level, who are taking more advanced classes, actually have a laptop. But the first expense is devices. Rochester Public Schools, thanks to federal funding during the COVID pandemic, which every school district received, has finally been able to achieve what, frankly, for decades has been a goal for many school districts, which is one kid, one device. Every student in Rochester Public Schools now has a device. When I was teaching in the 1990s, a high school teacher, getting your students access to technology meant reserving a time in a computer lab, and you were lucky if you got it once a month. Those days are long gone, but we still were not able to get to one kid, one device. We're now at that point. So the first thing that we pay for from that technology funding in our general fund is devices. The second is everything behind the walls in a technology system, servers and networks. The third thing is our cybersecurity. And as some of you may know, last spring we had in Rochester Public Schools an international criminal gang get into our networks and encrypt or code our data and demand a very expensive ransom in order to give us access back. And so we went back to the 1970s. We shut every system down, and I will tell you our technology department was heroic. It was pizzas under the door with those people for 2 months. We did not pay the ransom, and we brought our systems back. Took more time than anyone would have wanted, and in the meantime, teachers and students were heroic in making do without the connectivity that we have all become used to constantly. I would just say I was over at Willow Creek Middle School, and one of the math teachers there, I can call her out, Michelle Bacon, said that years ago when the district came to take her overhead projector, she hid it under the assumption that someday, despite the fact that the district gave her a smart board, she would need that overhead projector. And I am not making this up. I was there at Willow Creek and Michelle was wheeling out the overhead projector and she said, "I knew it." And I am not making this next part up. She had a 20-year-old bulb and it worked. So the third big expense is cybersecurity. And we actually were not deficient last spring when we got hacked. We were maintaining the level of cybersecurity that an organization of our type was expected to. Obviously, it was not enough. So we have since that time dramatically upgraded our protection, and that's the third expense. The fourth are investments in physical safety. We have learned that cameras are a game changer. They're a game changer in our schools for safety of students and staff, sometimes from behaviors that can be horseplay and sometimes worse. And they're a game changer outside our schools, identifying the threats that may be coming or present. Most of our cameras now, many of them, are what we call analog, not digital, which if it's digital, it makes it so that it's much more effective and we can very quickly look through it. But we do have that support in place for our schools. So that's what $7 million a year pays for. And that is actually what we would use the first $7 million from this levy to fund. And as I mentioned earlier, that would free up $7 million that we would immediately put into keeping class sizes at their current levels. In addition to cutting those 150 positions and $21 million, Since I've been here superintendent, we also raised class size. At a moment when we're asking our teachers, and they are enthusiastically accepting the challenge of completely rethinking how we teach reading. Raising class size is not the direction we want to be going, but there's no way to cut $21 million in a school district where 85% of the funding is people without raising class sizes. So we would maintain those technology services from the referendum funding, freeing up $7 million for class size. So what about the final $3.1 million that is in that $10.1 million? And what would that buy? That would buy a number of different investments that are tightly tied to our strategic plan. Let me give you 4 examples. First, we would maintain funding for a system that we purchased with computer funding that are short, teacher and student-friendly assessments, tests in reading and math that are very, very sensitive to students who are either struggling or students who are ready for more challenge. It's based on research from the University of Minnesota. It's called the FastBridge system. And it's dramatically different than the kind of tests that the state gives in the spring, and that maybe you get the results in August when kids are no longer in your class. You get the results immediately, and it also suggests to teachers teaching strategies they can use, small grouping strategies they can use, and other ways that we can support students based on the data. So it's what in my world we call frequent assessment, very different from what most people think of with testing. It's about testing to improve teaching. Second example was we've purchased what, again, in the world of tech is called a data warehouse. It allows us to bring all of the different sources of data that a school or even a classroom has together to paint a holistic picture of an individual kid or of a whole school or of the district. It's called EduClimber, and it allows us to bring not just test scores, but attendance rates, discipline rates, grades, student survey data on how they feel about school, how motivated they are, school culture, and it allows us to crunch those numbers to identify kids who need support and need services. And this is a tool that I think is going to be incredibly influential at the school level as we want to personalize education. I just came from a meeting of all of our school leaders, and one of the data elements that we're going to be putting in that system is what's called BAG data. BAG, behavior, attendance, and grades. When a struggling student has got one disciplinary referral, behavior, 15 or more days absent in a year, attendance, what we call chronic non-attendance, and 1 0 in middle or high school. So we don't give Fs right now, but you got a 0. When you have those 3 data points together, we can predict with 90% accuracy when a student is not going to graduate from high school. And we can predict it years ahead of when that happens. And we can intervene. But we can't do that unless we have data systems that can identify this is a kid whose BAG data says they are highly at risk of not completing high school. So that's a second example. Third example is one that I'm really very excited about, which is a new software platform that is all about helping kids prepare for and motivate for life after high school. It's got a very confusing name called Xello, X-E-L-L-O. But it starts in elementary school with kids using cartoons to do very engaging, interactive activities to help them start to think about what they love, who they are, what they want to do in the world. By middle and high school, they're doing career interest inventories, learning style inventories, things to figure out who am I in school and where do I want to go. And by high school, they're beginning to actually look toward careers, apply to post-secondary institutions, and the whole system automates that process. I said that to some current high school parents in Rochester, and they said, where was that system when my kid was applying? I'm glad their kids have made it through to higher education, but this platform is going to give us like a digital highway for the work of preparing kids for life beyond high school. And then the fourth and final example goes back to physical safety. It is taking what I told you about cameras and taking it to the next level. It is now possible, and without telling you, it's probably true in many public places, like a Target Field or a Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport, that you can use artificial intelligence to continually review the feed from a digital camera and spot a weapon with striking accuracy. And I wish that it was not the reality of schools today that we needed systems that could identify guns of any shape or size but it is something that we looked at last year with Rochester Police Department, and they urged us to purchase a system along those lines that would identify a threat the moment it's on one of our campuses, and this is, I think, the nightmare scenario for certainly me as a superintendent, but for any of you, if a weapon is in one of our buildings, the precise location of that weapon, that law enforcement knows where they are in that school. And if you've ever been in just Mayo High School, to pick one facility, knowing where a threat is in our building could be a game changer in a crisis. So those are some examples of that $3.1 million innovation, and that's why we've called this a technology for transformation agenda. The $7 million really is about maintaining our class size where we are and having a more stable and reliable funding source for technology. The $3.1 million really is about transformation in those areas and others. So what would it cost? An average house, and when I say this to some groups, they kind of flinch a little. An average house in Rochester is $325,000 at present, the county tells us. And that would be $135 a year at that level, or about $11.25 a month. Less if your home is worth less, more if it's worth more. I was over meeting with the staff at Washington Elementary the other morning, and it was early in the morning, and I kept saying, it's $135 a month. And some teacher in the back said, stop saying that, it's $135 a year. And I was like, okay, yes. So I think I got it right tonight, $135 a year. It's a bummer to end this overview on this point, but it's also part of my responsibility to make it clear that if the referendum does not pass, we will be making at least another $10 million in cuts next year after $21 million the past 2 years. And that is because we are using the last $10 million of our federal COVID funding to stabilize our system as we continue to put in place interventions for kids coming back out of the pandemic. We are right now paying for the salaries and benefits of all of our counselors and social workers from that $10 million. Now, we have planned to reallocate those dollars as we move beyond the pandemic. But if this referendum does not pass, we will not have another funding source to replace that $10 million in the federal funding. That doesn't go away in just Rochester, it goes away for every school district in the country by September 2024. Those dollars have to be expended. So that is a consequence of the referendum not passing that I also need to be honest with people about, and that I hope people will keep in mind as they consider whether or not this referendum is a good idea. And so that is the overview. When I came in, the amazing hosts we have at the Rochester Public Library said, "You don't have a PowerPoint?" And I said, "I'm trying to wean myself of PowerPoint because I've lived, eaten, and slept PowerPoint for decades, and so I hope that wasn't too much of a stream of consciousness. I see many of you have got the one-pager that summarizes what I said. A mailer will be coming out soon to all households that goes into great detail on these issues, and that also lists a chart that I hope you all will look at and that we can talk more about if you're interested. When you compare Rochester to other school communities in that local support for education, when you combine that operating referendum plus the Capital Projects referendum, despite the fact that I think few communities compare to Rochester and how much they care about education, we don't fare well compared to how much our community spends on it. And I'm pulling up my phone because I actually don't want to get any of these figures wrong. When you combine the Rochester Public Schools capital levy and our Capital Projects Levy, which is zero, and our current operating referendum, we currently receive $916 from our local community. In Bloomington, up in the Twin Cities, where I started my teaching career, they receive $3,119 per student. Minnetonka, an affluent suburb, but I think one that many people in Rochester would like to see their students certainly receive the same caliber education. They receive $315,000 per student. To pick a few more diverse ones that are, all of these are similar to Rochester in general size. Osseo, $2,716. South Washington County, very similar to our district, $2,110. Lakeville, where a lot of Rochester families go for athletic events and things like that, $1,929. North St. Paul, Maplewood, Oakdale is close to us at $979. But again, we are at $916 from those funding sources. If this referendum passes, we would actually, on the list of 11 school districts between 10,000 and 30,000 that we have in the mailer that's going out, we actually would just move up 3 places. So it's not a moonshot. It's a modest increase in moving that up. We would be at about $1,400 per student. So with that, I know Ginny has some questions that people submitted online, and I really want to make sure there's time for both your questions and certainly any reactions or statements that you might want to share as well. So Ginny.
Okay, so these were questions we did ask community members to submit questions beforehand, and some of these may already have been answered, and so however you would like to answer them. The first one, why should we approve this referendum when after millions of dollars in tax levies and previous referendums have been invested in our RPS system, the standardized test scores of RPS continue to decline?
Well, first of all, in terms of re-answering your question, my wife is here and she will tell you I never tire of saying the same thing many times. So I will not re-answer that one in terms of the financial parts of what I said, but standardized test scores as a measure of what Rochester Public Schools is doing right now in our new strategy, which is a dramatically different strategy from where Rochester has been, are not yet a measure of what we're doing because that cyber attack last spring made it impossible for us to give the state assessments. And so I wish I could tell you what was happening with the test score source that I'm sure the asker of that question was referring to. But we have 1 year where we don't have that data, and we had a federal waiver because it was impossible. To my surprise, the state of Minnesota doesn't even make the paper versions of the tests. It's only possible to give them on computer. We do have one source of information, though, that I think does speak to that person's core assumption about how Rochester Public Schools is doing, and that's our high school graduation rates. When we compare the graduation rates, once again, I'm going to make sure I give you the actual exact numbers. When we compare the graduation rates from the school year of 2021 to 2022, the state of Minnesota was quite excited to reverse years of decline with a 0.2% increase in their high school graduation rate. In Rochester Public Schools, our students went up 2.1%. And what's most exciting is that all kids went up, but the kids who are historically furthest behind went up the most. So white kids went up 2.22%. That's good. When we actually look at other groups, we saw that our students with disabilities went up 4.56%. Our students who live in poverty went up 2.32%. Our Latino and Latina students went up 2.78%. Our black students went up an extraordinary 8.69%. And so I think that speaks to this core assumption that we are not headed in the right direction academically. I believe that we are. We also know, and in the mailer that's going out to all households soon, there is a citation of a summary of the research, that funding does affect academic outcomes. There are sometimes people who stand up and suggest that funding is not connected to academic outcomes. That actually has been clearly refuted. It does. And so the investment that we're asking citizens to make is directly tied to the academic agenda that we've put in place through our strategic plan.
Thank you. The next one. During the pandemic, IT support for students was pushed onto the teachers. It expectedly went poorly. What steps have been taken to ensure sufficient quantity and quality of professional IT staff? Will sufficient support be available in the event the levy is approved?
The levy, interestingly, cannot directly pay for salaries, as I mentioned earlier, because it can pay for the equipment, but we will absolutely invest in the staff that is critical to maintain that. In the 2 years that I've been here, in Rochester Public Schools, like in every organization, the job market has been brutal. And it's been brutal for teachers, education support professionals, clerical, and other areas. And we have dramatically raised the wages of all of our hourly wage workers in Rochester Public Schools, first because they need it, and second because we need to support and retain them. We've done that for clerical, we've done that for maintenance, we've done that for food service, we've done that for other groups. We are currently in negotiation with our teachers and our principals. There has been no group in the school district, and there's under 40 people, so we're not talking about a cast of thousands. There has been no group that has had higher movement in and out of the district than our technology department. And that's for a reason all of you, I'm sure, can understand. Their skills are incredibly in demand. So we have, under the leadership of our Chief Administrative Officer, John Carlson, who's here, we have also not only significantly raised their salaries, we have significantly reorganized and resituated their department to begin a long-term development of a technology strategy that I think will absolutely address some of those concerns. And I'm pleased to say that at present, for the first time since I've been here, that department is fully staffed. And we've had no departures this school year. That doesn't happen without a lot of hard work. When any one of them, and I hope none of them are listening, could go to another organization like that, they all actually happen to be super enthused about education and kids, but we obviously have to adequately support them or they will end up at a certain small hospital in town that is very hungry for people with their skill set. Great question.
And this one you may just have answered. So basically what you said, given the steady and sustained rise in STEM professional salaries, how does RPS intend to remain competitive in the job market for STEM teachers and IT professionals with the necessary skills to implement the initiatives supported by this levy? Did you want to add anything?
I appreciate that. I think that I spoke to the technology piece. When you talk about STEM teachers, in Rochester Public Schools, like in every other school district, our teachers are paid the same regardless of their particular content area. I have proposed in our ongoing negotiations with our Rochester Education Association that we have some additional compensation for positions that are chronically short, that are chronically hard to fill. We're in the middle of negotiations. I wouldn't comment on specifics of how we're doing, but it is precisely to differentiate the fact that we have some people whose licensure and skill set makes them frankly, more competitive than I was as a social studies teacher who had no coaching license. So I was not a hot commodity, whereas a physics teacher, especially a physics teacher who can coach, is a very hot commodity. So that is an ongoing subject. It's very different from our tech staff, but it's a great question. We have got to be retaining and supporting the very best educators in the state. We have amazing ones, and it is a top priority of our strategic plan to enhance that in the years ahead.
Given the rapid advances and changes in the tech sector, is a 10-year project a sensible choice?
It is the only choice the state gives us. If you remember back where we began and I was telling you about the 3 different levy sources, we can only do this for 10 years and then there is no authorization to renew. So either we would need to, 10 years from now, make do without the $10.1 million a year, which actually will be adjusted as the Rochester tax that I described of the new strategic investments would not be hardware. Those would be applications and software that will move us forward on our strategic plan. So it's a point well taken. It's not just servers and tablets that would be supported through this referendum. It would also be the kind of tech-based resources that we know are the future of the field.
If this referendum passes, does it have to go back to the voters after 10 years to be renewed, or can the school board renew it for another 10 years without a vote?
Has to go back to the voters. The school board cannot renew it. That one's important.
And the last one just came in, so I need to bring it up. What was the impact of the spring's cyber attack on student learning? How could the new funding prevent a disruption like this from happening again?
We have, as I mentioned in passing, dramatically upgraded our cybersecurity protection already. We've done that from existing resources. This levy would provide us with continued funding for the new investments we've already made and allow us to further increase it. For obvious reasons, I won't talk in too much detail about the changes we've made because literally every organization is being observed right now in terms of their cybersecurity. But we've significantly enhanced it already. The question of what happened with student learning during our 6 weeks or so of techless existence last spring is super interesting. We don't have data on it, but I will say a widespread comment that I heard from students and teachers was that there was a benefit to that period. Now that may sound counterintuitive. Wait, you're here to talk about technology and then you're going to talk about the benefit. It did focus people on human interaction and connection in a useful way. The problem was, after about the first 3 weeks, both students and teachers were saying, wait a minute, the technology was a powerful enabler of learning, and I need it back for the academic piece. And so I think the place where we need to get is making sure that we are investing in those human connections even when we are looking at screens for purposes of teaching and learning. So there were some relational positives of what happened, but I think by the end of it, nobody was actually wanting to stay there because we've seen so many benefits to what our teachers are doing with technology in the classroom.
Okay, and that's the end of those questions. So we are now open to questions from the audience, and you can just raise your hand, and Dr. you can choose who to ask.
That sounds good. I see one right back there. That's great.
Yeah, I just have a question. I've been here in Rochester for about 12 years. I think I've lived through 3 different school referenda in that period. And every time that happens, they always say this will probably be the last one. And I'm just wondering, assuming this is approved, are you committing to not doing another referendum for some other school purpose within the near future, like the next 5 years after that? Or are we going to be hit by one referendum after another for some slightly different purpose within the school system?
I'm not going to commit to it, but I'm going to honestly say there's no plan for that. So 5 years ago, we did not know COVID was going to come. Who would have ever predicted something like that? So who knows what's ahead in the next 5 years, but there is not a current plan in the next 5 years to put another levy before the voters of Rochester. And I say that as somebody who is very committed to long-term thinking, so I'm not saying that casually, but I think if I use the language of I commit, it would be committing an error that we all should have learned from in the last 5 years, which is that it's very hard to predict extraordinary circumstances that might arise. But right now, our financial stability plan does not call for putting another referendum before the voters in the next 5 years. And we understand, or I should speak for myself, I understand the need to be very mindful of the impact on taxes on citizens in a community, that the health of our school district is directly related to the health of our community, and we understand for people, especially people on fixed incomes, property taxes matter. And so that is actually why when I was reading, I don't know if you were in the room, when I was reading off those differences in the pupil funding that Rochester receives, again, $916 compared to $3,100, that is why we have not put a referendum on the ballot that would put us at the top. We could have done that. All of those communities voted for that level of funding. We have put in the big picture, I think, prudent increase on the ballot, as opposed to something that would actually move us into the top tier of local support for school districts in Minnesota. Thank you for the question. Really appreciate it. Any others or comments? Yeah.
This question kind of like, I was inspired to ask this question by NPR. I was listening to the NPR when there was a caller, they were talking about reduced and free lunch, free for the kids in school. And the caller that called, after 5-6 minutes kind of I realized that he didn't even have no kids in the school system. And his position was, why am I paying lunch for some other kids that have nothing to do with it? So in this case, do we have the demographics of Rochester public school system, the number of students that parents have that go to these schools versus the number of parents that don't have no kids in the system? Mm-hmm. And the reason I said that was like the other day when I was driving by another car, I saw a car that had the Colorado tag and it said vote no to the referendum. And I'm thinking, I'm like, you're not even from here. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of, you're not even from here, so why are you even like advertising? And then I was like, maybe they just moved here.
That's very nice of you to think that. Do you want to come up here? Because you're better at this than I am. Rochester Public Schools, before the pandemic, well, during the pandemic, when we were not doing free lunch
Yeah.
was at slightly more than 40% of the community qualified. And that was trending upward modestly. It's very different by schools. That's a district average. We have some school with very, very low percentage of kids whose family income qualified for free reduced price lunch, and some with some with a majority. So we were at that point in Rochester. When you talk about the free lunch and the free breakfast change, I'll be honest with you, I made a bit of a journey on that. When I first heard about it, I thought, should families, like my kids would have been if they were in Rochester Public Schools, who can pay for the lunch, have it subsidized? Or should we target families who have that need? And I initially had that thought. The more I looked at it, and especially the more I talked to our food service people in Rochester, they are amazing. They do amazing work. The more I realized that it's a good idea because we had a significant number of kids who, for whatever reason, were not eating lunch or breakfast because of the cost. And in the first week, and the governor happened to be in town to serve lunch at one of our schools, which is, to be honest, why I looked up the statistics. When we compared the start of school this year to the start of school last year, so when lunch was free versus when you had to pay, it was a 15% increase in the number of kids who ate lunch. Now, we don't know exactly why, but when I asked our food service staff, do you think it's because they don't actually have to pay? There was not a single person who disagreed. They said yes, that you took the fee off the table, and therefore, for the kid in the lunch line, it took that thinking off. So I've made a little bit of journey. I was never really opposed to it, but I was thinking, okay, is this the best place to spend scarce money? And I think what it does is it just normalizes lunch or breakfast. Everybody gets it. And so if you're a fifth grader, you don't understand family income and things like that. So you're just like, is my family going to have to pay for this or not? And if you say, if the answer is no, we seem to be seeing some increase. And we know, it's just common sense, we actually know from some data, when students are not hungry, they can learn better. So it's a great question. One thing that is a challenge that I know John and others are worried about is when lunch no longer requires applying for a free or reduced price lunch status, how are we going to count low-income families in our schools, which does generate a lot of other revenue? There's different ways that are being talked about to do this, because it was never actually a very good way to go ask somebody, can you tell me your income and fill out this complex form? But that's a challenge that we and others are thinking a lot about. How are we going to identify those families who are low income and need additional supports, and schools generate additional money? So I would say over the next year, we're going to come to some very different ways of thinking about it, but it's a great question. Yeah, thank you.
But there's the other part of this question, at least that I heard, is what percentage of the voters have somebody in school?
Great
because
question.
Again, we know there's a lot of us who know our kids have already done that. And I certainly support, I support it 100%. But, some people,
We know that number, it's 80%. 80% in Rochester have no kids in our schools. And so we're not that unique, and we're not unique at all in that. That's actually demographically the case in most places. But that creates a challenge, for sure. Every once in a while, when I first came, I started doing these videos where I go out and I interview students in our schools. And to my surprise, they get 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 views. And the reason I did that actually was totally focused on those people. Because to the extent that anybody goes and looks at YouTube for the school district, and obviously somebody does, I want them to see our kids. Our kids are awesome. They are funny, they're smart, they're optimistic, they're increasingly diverse. I'll just give you the backstory on one of them. If you go, there's one that I did where I asked kids about what their spark is, the thing they loved. And if you're in the school district and you've seen this, it's become a little bit infamous. There's one little girl who said it's singing. And I said, well, could you sing? And in the video, the guy, a young Rochester graduate named Michael Mugambo, who films them with me, Michael edits it all. You can see that she goes on for like a pretty long time, and it's actually very funny, and he cuts back to her, and she gets lost in her song. It was 5 times as long as what Michael kept in the video. She would never have stopped. and nobody could figure out what the song was, because she was just on a loop. And if you will go see the video, it's if you go to the school district website and then you look at my bio, all the videos are there. And if you look at like what our Rochester kids sparks, you can see the girl, and it's hysterical. And finally, the assistant principal came over and patted her on the back and said, "I think Dr. Pekel needs to interview another kid now." But anyway, it's very much with an eye toward those folks getting to know. And also, one of the things I love about Rochester is our schools are becoming increasingly diverse. Over the next couple of years, definitely during my tenure as superintendent, we will become more than half students of color in the school district. And that varies by school, and I see that as a wonderful thing. I think if any community can make increasing diversity a virtue and can embrace it, it's Rochester. In so many places that has led to, shrinking pie thinking that, who gets what, and I really do believe that we can flip the switch on that and see that as a wonderful, positive, growing change. But it means Rochester Public Schools looks different than it did for people who went to our schools 30 or 40 years ago. And so trying to make sure that they feel a connection, and to this gentleman's question back here, that they feel we're using their dollars responsibly. Again, we put this referendum on the ballot after cutting $21 million. So we are not doing this because we are not mindful of the need to be good fiscal stewards of the public's resources. So, yeah.
What's the average cameras in a normal school?
What's the average camera?
Yeah, in a normal school.
The number?
Yeah.
I can't tell you that.
No, he said in a normal
I'm
school.
kidding.
In a normal school.
I'm kidding. It depends on which school. Because some of our older schools have very few, and some of our newer ones have many. And what you want it having coverage so you can see every space. And the newer cameras that are digital allow you to see a broad area of the school. There's none in the bathrooms, so you should know that.
We should do the bathrooms halfway to see.
Yeah,
Because
that's
it's
right.
happening this bad.
I know, they won't
So
let
the
me.
reason I want to say is here now you say you looking everywhere the camera, but like inside, I'm mom.
Mhm.
So I hear you something badly see, and then the teachers in there, the principal, everybody here, but like in some bedrooms.
I asked if we could put them in bathrooms, and they said no. I did.
I don't want to see the every
Right.
building, but like maybe less people. How many people is going to go in the inside or room? To see.
It's a
It's
very
gonna
serious-
10 or 5 people, 10 more than.
Right. We're going to put them outside all the bathrooms, for sure.
I didn't say.
Our schools are on the whole very safe, but like every school district, especially after the pandemic, we have seen some behavior challenges, and we are real about that. We also have consequences for behavior in Rochester schools, but the camera piece, I think I mentioned the cameras because the technology referendum would help us support it, not because that is a super important part of our strategy for safety, but it's something that this referendum would help us make much more effective across the school districts. Yeah.
When you do a referendum like this, I've always wondered, because I work as an election judge too, and it just seems like why wasn't this put on the ballot last year? When we already had the election judges paid for the, state election and this. Who pays for the election? Does that come out of the school district budget? And
In
as
this
well,
case-
and all these, and all the flyers you're gonna mail to everybody, is that out of the school district budget?
Yep.
It
It
is,
is.
okay.
It is. If I was going to design a way to fund education, would I have local voting for specific projects? No. I think if other countries look at this system and they would never adopt this. You'd have policymakers make a decision about how much it costs to educate kids to the standards that you've set. But we are where we are. We did not put this on the ballot last year because we felt we needed to put our fiscal house in order before we asked the voters to think about doing anything more. And so we were cutting $14 million last year from the budget and $7 million the year before. And we felt that it was very important to do that so that people did not think that we were unwilling to make the hard decisions and just going to go to the voters for more resources. We also were in the midst still of using, as intended, the federal funding for COVID to address the recovery from the pandemic. And the student needs academically, socially, emotionally were and continue to be very significant. So we had those dollars at that point. Those dollars by federal law must be done by September 2024. And so we're now at a point where those resources, we've been very careful in using them, they are now phasing out by next fall. So this is the moment where, as I explained, if this passes, the 10 million of the last COVID funding, it's not a direct one-to-one, but it's 10.1 million for technology. We're in a place that we'll still have to make some hard decisions, but we're in a solid place. If it doesn't pass, we would have that $10 million cut.
Was there any way you could find out how much it actually costs to do a referendum like this?
Yeah, in this case, I don't know, right now we're still in the midst of it. I don't know if, John, you know exactly. What happens for this year is that whichever governing body has a vote on shares the cost. So the referendum for the school district is a one vote for this November 7th, and the other is the city sales tax.
So that'll be shared then.
So we are sharing the cost. So it's not just the school district. Every once in a while someone asks me if this was a political tactical decision, and the answer was no. This is when it was the right time for us in our financial strategy in the district to put it on. I'm not enough of a politician to know if it would have been better or worse to be on the ballot last year. I do know, based on what we're all seeing at the federal level, it would be a very unusual year next fall to be on the ballot because we're going to have a presidential election. And who knows who will be in that presidential election or what that will look like. It's hard to imagine that local school issues will get a lot of attention amidst that presidential election. I do have to say that if the referendum doesn't pass this November, the school board could decide to put it on the ballot again in the future. But that would be a decision that we would face if and when that happens. And thank you for being an election judge. I have to say, I mentioned at the beginning that as I started my career as a social studies teacher, and in so many places in the country, people are not willing to do what you do. And regardless of your party, it's the machinery of democracy, and the fact that people have, for many different reasons, all around the country, not been willing to serve. When I've asked our county administrator if in Olmsted County we are seeing that, I was happy that she said no. Right now we're seeing that our elections are going to be adequately staffed, and that's not the case everywhere. So thank you for that. Yeah?
I was fascinated that you said after a few weeks of this close learning without a lot of technology, they wanted it back, okay? So this whole thing is based on the idea that these devices really enhance the classroom experience. I'm from a family of teachers and we're talkers, okay? So help me and people like me understand what is that great benefit, which I know exists, for these devices to be in this classroom to assist this classroom teacher.
So I mentioned a moment ago the new software that we have purchased that is really exciting, that is all about who am I, where do I want to be after high school. We know the number one problem that teachers identify in their classrooms is student motivation to learn. And we know that when kids have a powerful positive vision of what they want to do in life, that has direct implications for their effort. So that's reason number one, the motivation piece. The second reason, and this, we are on the cusp of such a revolution, and it's also scary, but there are positive sides to what artificial intelligence is going to do for education. And I think its primary contribution is not going to be at the classroom level or the school level, because that's the purview of an individual teacher, and that's the purview of what teachers, principals do to create great school cultures. It's going to be at the individual kid level. This summer, in our Summer of Discovery, which is our name for summer school, we piloted an AI, artificial intelligence-driven tutoring program called Dreambox. There's Dreambox Math and Dreambox Learning. And it's what, to nerd out for a minute, you call a large language model of AI, essentially aggregating all of the different efforts that can be found on the internet to respond to a problem, a question, a prompt, and to give the very best response that has worked in thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of other times to you at the moment that you're asking the question. So that is what is ChatGPT, if you've ever used it in our world. What Dreambox Math did this summer was stunning. When a kid was getting multiplying a fraction wrong, It's on a tablet, it's not a new device. What it did was it prompted the kid with the best graphic and example that had worked for thousands of other kids at exactly that moment. And it was continually learning from what didn't work. And so it's quite extraordinary for diagnosing those places where a student is missing a foundational skill. And when we know that a kid who moves on through school without some of those foundational concepts, it's devastating to their ability to learn at higher levels. My best example of that, and then I won't keep going with it, it's about a foundational concept. If you ask some little kids who are learning math, arithmetic, just learning, you should have an equation there, 2 + 2 = 4, and you ask them what is the equal sign. A kid who doesn't fundamentally understand the concept will sometimes say, well, that sign means the answer goes here. They interpret it as a procedural symbol. Like, here's where you put the answer. What they don't know is that, in fact, what it means is what's on this side is the same as this side. It's equivalent. So when the kid doesn't have that foundational understanding of equivalence, the teacher keeps throwing all kinds of new arithmetic at it, but they're not fundamentally understanding that it's like a scale, and that 4 is the same as 2 + 2. But that plays out through not just math, but subject area after subject area. And one of the things we see, and this is a challenge in particular of American education as opposed to some of the leading systems in the world as diverse as Finland or Singapore, we move kids on without foundational concepts answered. And I'm not an advocate of like flunking kids and retaining them, but we know that when you go on and you don't have that foundational concept, you are really gonna struggle. But if you say that to a teacher who has 28 kids in their class, or 18, depending on the grade level, or more at the high school level, they will say, no duh, I recognize it. I don't have time to go sit with this one kid and diagnose exactly where they're missing the concept and then fill it or fix it. That's where the contribution, I think, of artificial intelligence is going to be extraordinary at that individual level of diagnosing some of those kids. Our teachers can do it too. The research on small group tutoring is off the charts. It shows these incredible academic gains, and then you say that to a good teacher, and they're like, yeah, if I have 3 kids, I can do the same thing. So this is an area where, finally, I think technology is going to give us some enabling.
That's just what I was thinking, it's like having your own personal tutor.
Yeah,
To check you.
it totally is. It really, really is. It's pretty exciting that what we're going to do. So, yeah.
Yes, I've seen or heard on public radio the same very thing on reading.
Yeah.
They've identified that certain people learn to read a certain way, but there's a subset that don't learn that.
Yep.
And if you identify them early, you can pivot how you teach them to a different technique. And I think you're saying that like AI would be able to do this. Just
that will be helping with kids who absolutely is the perfect thing. That will help a lot with kids who really need that intensive. You still have to have the teacher or tutor guiding.
yes.
And then there also is a lot we're learning, especially in reading, about some misguided strategies that were used across the country and here in Rochester for a number of years that actually are very complex, but it boils down to having underemphasized phonics or helping kids decode words. I'm proud to share that that's making an enthusiastic return to Rochester, and we are making sure that teachers know how to help kids develop the ability to see. I knew that would be a plausible. But yeah, it's a great point. It really does come down to if that kid can't decode the words, they never shift from learning to read to reading to learn.
As a teacher, I've seen the ability to say, take out your Chromebooks, and the equity and access to education and the opportunity presented by every single kid, 100% of the kids, opening it up and being able to write a paragraph that they can submit. It's really huge. So I appreciate that. And I had a funny moment earlier this week. Kid was pounding away because the letter I wasn't going. He's like, yeah, about every 20 times I can get a letter I. And I was able to say, go down, talk with the school secretary. It was back in 4 minutes with a different Chromebook because the infrastructure is there to swap it out and have it taken care of. So that was an old machine from the COVID funding. When COVID funding runs out in 2024, is this going to allow that kind of maintenance to continue happening? Because we can buy the splashy stuff, but we also need to maintain it.
Yes, it's a critical need, and that's why while I appreciate the question that somebody asked over the web about is it just hardware? No, it's not just, but it is emphatically hardware. This is quite striking. When I first got to Rochester, and I remember talking with John again, who was our chief financial officer at the time and now has a broader portfolio, I kept noticing teachers had worse computers than their students. I said, why is that? And he said, well, the state funding stream that we utilize to buy student devices originated in the era when they were trying to get school districts to buy devices for students. So they said, you can't use these for anybody else. It can only be for students, unless a student has used it for its life cycle, 3 years. So you and others were getting hand-me-down computers that kids had used for 3 years. To me, that is crazy. Our teachers have at least as good devices. Now, the COVID funding has temporarily fixed that we actually have been able to do both. Going forward, the levy would make it possible for us to maintain that hardware and make sure our teachers have at least as good of devices as our kids.
Well, our time is basically up. So I want to thank everyone for attending tonight. As I had said, this is being recorded. If you would like to see it again, or if you know someone that you would like to encourage them to watch, you can find this on the library YouTube channel. It is also on the League of Women Voters Facebook page or our website, which is lwvrochester.org. You can also visit vote411.org. And when you're there, Vote 411, you can see a sample ballot, which will have this question plus the city's question. You can register to vote, check to see if you are registered to vote. You can find your polling place. So those are all very important things. I would, again, it's important, please remember to vote on November 7th, or you may vote early. That is going on right now. We did have a different, basically the same thing 2 weeks ago. If you would like to see the recording about the city sales tax information, you may also watch that one. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I should have thanked the league. You all are amazing.
The library is closing at 8 o'clock, so, but there is another event in here tomorrow, so they're asking us to move the chairs off to the side at least, or put them away, but then if you, conversations, please take them outside. Thank you again.
Thank you.